If you've ever played a game with a decent amount of dialogue, you've probably experienced dialogue choices before. You can see these kinds of options pop up everywhere, from story-heavy adventure games to traditional JRPGs. This idea of presenting preset options to control what the character you're playing as will say is an idea that's been around for a while, yet is stuck around in many forms to this day. This begs the question, what is it about these simple options that game developers see as necessary to a player's experience? Whether you've been fascinated by the nuances of dialogue choices like I have, or are someone who has never played a game with a dialogue choice before, there's a lot to learn about these simple text options and how they can change a video game for the better or the worse. Now, without further ado, looks like I have some options to choose. Let's see. Well, this top one is a bit boring. Is that second one supposed to be a joke? It doesn't really make sense, and that bottom one is way too harsh. Well, I guess the first one would be the best thing for this situation. Let's go with that. Yes! I got 10 creator points! It looks like the video's starting again. The first question that arises when thinking about dialogue options is why we even have them in the first place. There are a few key reasons why games might choose to incorporate this system. For one, it can be a key part in characterizing a silent protagonist. Now, of course, these characters don't speak for a reason, they are mostly used so you can project yourself onto them. But sometimes that just isn't enough. I know I, for one, wouldn't make for the most interesting character if I was copy and pasted into a video game. One solution for this is allowing the player to characterize a silent protagonist through their own dialogue choices. Well-written games will include options that will be different enough from one another. Some might be stoic and serious, while others could be snarky and sarcastic. This gives the player their own power to almost customize the silent character. If they only choose serious responses, that will affect how the player perceives that character. You can also convey key information purely through what is written in these dialogue options. Sure, the character might not talk, but they can convey information to the player through the choices that you're given. One fun example of this is seen in Genshin Impact. Purely based on the traveler's dialogue options, we can put together a picture of their relationship with Paimon, with many teasing responses popping up frequently alongside some heartfelt sentiments. Dialogue choices are essential when working with silent protagonists. Not only are they the only way these characters can quote-unquote talk, but it gives the player agency in creating a personality for this character. Another obvious yet still important aspect of these choices is simply engaging the player during dialogue sections. Not every player loves sitting through big long dialogue sections in games, especially when they're used in some sort of action-focused game. Some people don't have the attention span for it, and others just get straight up bored. Providing small menus that require player input to progress a dialogue scene is a simple way to keep player engagement alive, and also to ensure that the player's attention hasn't drifted off the scene completely. It's a small thing, but if a player feels like their character is actually a part of the conversation, they are more likely to be engaged. This also keeps these scenes from feeling like you're just watching a movie. Lastly, and most importantly, these dialogue options gives players a choice to make. That might seem a bit on the nose, but that doesn't make it any less relevant. I know I can't speak for everyone, but I know I and many others like to make choices in games. It's part of what sets video games apart from any other medium. The player is the one deciding how things play out, as opposed to something like a movie where everything happens the same whether you do something or not. Dialogue choices are a very simple way to create this feeling. Your choices are literally laid out in front of you, and you get to decide what your character says in that moment. As spectacular as I make that concept sound, it doesn't take a genius to see that the majority of these choices are pointless. Sure, you have options, but sometimes what follows your choice is exactly the same no matter what you pick. That being said, even the most pointless choices can still make an impact. It all comes down to the illusion of choice, making a player believe their choice has an impact even if it doesn't. A player won't always know when something specifically changes after choosing a dialogue option, but the game is written well enough it can appear as if what you chose made a substantial difference even if the change was very minor, hence the illusion of choice. With all this in mind, we can create a kind of category system to break down the different ways developers incorporate dialogue options and the effect it has on both the player and on the game. There are three main types of dialogue options that we can simplify this down to. Hard choices. These choices make a significant impact on either the story or the gameplay of the game. Soft choices. These choices will create some sort of small change in the player's experience, but won't drastically impact anything. And non-choices. These choices don't change anything about the game, and things will proceed the exact same no matter what you choose. These three categories cover pretty much any dialogue choice one could encounter, and the different ways they turn out. I want to look at each of these types of choices a bit deeper, and pull some examples from well-known games to weigh the pros and cons of each one. First, let's look at hard choices. These are the choices that make a serious difference in the game, such as a branching path in a story or a change in relation with a character. These choices are the kind of choice every dialogue option strives to be, something that really makes a difference. The unfortunate part is that these choices are very hard to write and develop, You can only have a small amount in a game, and you can't make the changes too ambitious, as many players will not see what is behind one or more of the options. When done correctly though, it can give the player a truly unrivaled sense of control in the progression of the game, and can also encourage replays if the changes are significant enough. One such example of a choice like this can be found in Fire Emblem Three Houses. There are 2 points in the game where you can select which people you align with. This changes almost everything about the game: the units you can use, the path the story takes, and your relationship with the characters. The developers of Three Houses deserve a lot of respect. It can't have been easy to make a branching story like this when creating a game with a linear story would have been a lot easier. Another example of hard choices can be seen in games like Mass Effect or any game made by Telltale. These games all consist of a lot of little choices, but these choices all add up to determine where the game goes in the end. Some could argue that this works better, since it gives each individual choice power rather than only 1 or 2 major choices. There's also a medium between these two ideas, where a game works on a flowchart system determined by your choices. I've only ever seen this model in a visual novel type game, where almost every choice you make forks the story in 2, and in order to see everything the game has to offer, you have to go back and make different choices. This one is tricky to pull off since you have to make the entire game revolve around the system. It's really fun when done well, but it wouldn't work in every game. All these are great ways of making choices that really have an impact. They take effort, but when done right, you can create a very engaging experience for the player that's formed by their decisions. The next type of choice to look at is a soft choice, what I believe to be the bread and butter of dialogue choices. Sure, they aren't as flashy as hard choices, but they take a lot less effort and can be worked into almost every game. Soft choices are the kinds of dialogue choices that have a little extra something added after you choose them. This could manifest as an extra piece of dialogue you could only see if you picked that option, or some sort of in-game bonus like an item or bonding points of the character. As for a game that showcases excellent use of both types of soft choices, let's turn to my one true love, Persona 5. This game utilizes both forms of soft choices that I just brought up. It's practically unparalleled in the way it creates unique responses to your dialogue choices. If you've played the game, you know there are so many different humorous dialogue options that will lead to humorous responses from the other characters in the conversation that could have only been possible from choosing one of the options. We also see clever use of soft choices in the way that social links work. When hanging out with your confidants, certain dialogue choices will lead to these little music notes popping up that represent the points that you need to reach the next level of friendship with them. This system makes players pay attention to which options they are choosing in these moments, because they'll get rewarded when they choose the best ones. This isn't exactly exclusive to Persona 5, you can see all this great design present in the other modern Persona games, but I will quite literally take any opportunity I can to talk about Persona 5 specifically. Was this entire video made just so I could gush about the dialogue options in Persona 5? Entirely possible, but I won't admit to it. Moving away from Her Highness Persona 5, there's also a similar system present in the Xenoblade series. The series doesn't feature many dialogue options throughout the main stories, but within the optional heart-to-heart scenes you are presented with dialogue options. Some answers will not only change the course of these conversations, but can reward you as well with bonuses such as affinity or blade trust. These types of choices tend to appear only in specific situations, but we can return to Fire Emblem Three Houses for a broader approach to this system. Three Houses uses its dialogue choices to build support points between Byleth and the other characters, but unlike the games we looked at so far, opportunities to gain support points could happen at any time. They could happen inside a story event, or they could happen when talking to people outside of story events. This way, players have no idea which choices are important and which ones aren't. This encourages the player to think through every one of their dialogue choices, as opposed to just some. Of course, not every game has something they can give out to the player for selecting certain options, but games that go out of their way to have a bit of fun with their choices are certainly highlights too. Games like Undertale have dialogue choices that are inconsequential, but certain options can lead to some of the game's funnier scenes. One more game to highlight in this section, I wanted to bring up the Final Fantasy VII Remake. It doesn't have many dialogue choices, but almost all of them build up to small changes, like which dresses characters wear in Wall Market, or what character you meet up for a heartfelt chat in a later chapter. You won't always know that your choice is changing something, but this behind-the-scenes work is a small thing that helps make every player's experience slightly more unique. Last and, well, probably least, are the non-choices. As the title implies, these are fake choices. No matter what option you pick, absolutely nothing about the game will be changed. If your character is asked if they agree with something, and the two choices are yes and totally, that's a non-choice right there. Non-choices can also have dialogue options that look different yet still aren't. Maybe a character won't respond to you, or give some sort of answer that addresses both options even if it seems like a weird thing to say. This kind of stuff pops up all over the place in games with dialogue choices, but some games are more blatant about it than others. Pokemon games, especially the more recent ones, have some really poorly written dialogue choices. Lots of the two variations of yes thing I mentioned earlier, but also some of the most obvious instances of the character you're talking to addressing both options. Then there's Genshin Impact, which isn't quite as bad as Pokemon, but the game has a lot of dialogue options between all of its quests, way more than a game like Pokemon. Since the game places such a focus on it, it just makes those instances when a character you're in a conversation with straight up doesn't address what you chose stick out a lot more, especially since it's something that pops up frequently. These types of choices don't ruin a game by any means, but if they are too obvious, it can become immersion breaking. Now that all those ideas are in place, let's see how it all fits together to make the best possible experience for a player, while also being convenient for the developers and the writers. The idea of making every dialogue choice lead to some unique, funny line, or to have a reward behind every one is far from realistic, yet the dialogue choices that are obviously fake don't exactly work either. So this means the game will often want to create a middle ground, choices that might lead to a minor change or no change, but in a way that the player still thinks their choice has changed something. This all really applies to those non-choices, of course, as they are the only potential weak point of dialogue choices. Both hard and soft choices do what they need to on their own, that is, giving the player a choice that actually creates a tangible difference. That brings us back to the idea of illusion of choice, making these options seem as important as possible. Well-written dialogue choices will be different enough from each other that they couldn't be perceived as being the same answer, while also not diverting the conversation from its intended path. Keep in mind, a player doesn't know what is behind the options they don't choose, aside from those who replay the game again or look things up online. As long as you can make the player believe that what they chose led to a unique response, that's a dialogue choice done right. The recent Guardians of the Galaxy game has hundreds of dialogue choices. I'm sure many of them don't affect anything, but the game has made me actively wonder what would change if I went back and chose different choices at many different occasions. Choices that don't make a difference aren't going anywhere, but clever design and writing can satisfy both the development team and the player. Well, now I somehow have to wrap this whole mess of a video up. Was it cohesive? Eh. Was it confusing? Probably. Did I use the word choice too much? Most definitely. I know I spent a chunk of time at the end there talking about the more negative side of things, but I really wanted this video to be about why dialogue choices are important and a celebration of the games that get them right. And no, I'm not just talking about Persona 5, gosh. I really appreciate all the games that do clever things with an idea as simple as a dialogue choice, and how it can be used to make a memorable experience for a player. Whether it's a hard choice, soft choice, or non-choice, every type of choice has examples that showcase great game design, and it just goes to show that any of these can be used in positive ways. So here's to seeing more great dialogue choices in the future. I can't wait to see what sorts of fun and creative stuff upcoming games have for us in the future. That's going to be it for me today. If you found this video interesting, go ahead and leave a like, and if you're feeling extra fancy, feel free to subscribe. I'm like the wild card in someone's sub box. Who knows what I'll post next and when the heck I'll post it? Ooh. Until next time, folks.